is my pleasure to join this specific session on this national seminar on schools of art in India. And this is the second session focusing on regional schools of art. So I am thankful to the organizers of the Pleach India Foundation, very well-known organization working on heritage conservation, preservation and research in Indian context. So I thank again all the organizers as well as the participants of this session. We have 6 papers here, and let us start with the first paper on regional schools of temple sculpture in northwestern Karnataka, form, iconography and ornamentation by Shweta, Kamleshwar, Handigol. So may I request Ms. Shweta to start her presentation.
Regional schools of temple sculpture in northwestern Karnataka for iconography and ornamentation. Temple sculpture in the Deccan is not merely an artistic tradition. It is a record of interaction between regional practices, religious ideas and dynastic patronage. Within this larger landscape, northwestern Karnataka occupies a partially important position with its dense concentration of early temple sites and continuous artistic activity from the period of the Kadamba dynasty to the Ratta dynasty. The region presents a sustained and evolving sculptural tradition. However, despite this importance, these traditions are often absorbed into border Deccan or pan-Indian narratives. In the process, the question of regional differentiation remains insufficiently explored. This is where the idea of regional schools becomes significant. It allows us to move beyond the notion of a single homogeneous style and instead recognize variation in form, in iconography, and in ornamentation across sites and periods. The early phase under the Chalukyan of Badami, particularly at Aihole, Badami caves and Pattadakal, reflects a movement of experimentation that laid the foundation for later developments. What follows is not uniformity but refinement. Subsequent temples shows increasing complexity, indicating the emergence of distinct sculptural idioms. This paper argues that temple sculpture in northwestern Karnataka evolved into distinct yet interconnected regional schools shaped by local patronage, religious affiliation, and cross-regional artistic interaction. By analyzing selected temple sites, including the Kopeshwara temple in present-day Maharashtra, the study highlights both diversity and continuity within sculptural tradition of the Deccan. Early phase formation of sculptural traditions. Let me now turn to the early phase where the sculptural traditions begin to take shape. The formative stage can be traced to the period of the Kadamba dynasty, particularly at Halasi. At sites such as the Bhuvaraha temple, we see the beginning of regional sculptural expression. The form here are simple and restrained. Ornamentation is minimal. The emphasis is on structural clarity and essential form rather than decorative richness. This simplicity is important. It marks a stage where the focus is on iconographic presence, not ornamentation. This foundation develops further under the Chalukyan of Badami, especially at the Badami caves. Here, sculpture begins to show confidence. There is a clearer understanding of volume, proportion, and spatial composition. The rock cut medium allows for large-scale panels where figures display a greater movement, anatomical details, and expressive quality. So, compared to Halasi, we see a clear shift from simplicity to a more developed and dynamic sculptural language. This development continues at Aihole. Aihole represents a phase of active experimentation. Here we do not see a single fixed style. Instead, we see multiple forms, multiple approaches, and multiple influences. Sculptural representation become more varied, iconography becomes more organized. This suggests the presence of different workshop tradition working simultaneously. This process reaches its maturity at Pattadakal. At this stage, experimentation gives way to balance and refinement. Sculpture shows improved proportions, stable composition, and more elaborate ornamentation. Decorative elements such as friezes and pillar carvings are executed with presence. This is often identified with the Karnataka Dravida architectural synthesis, where northern and southern traditions are integrated into a coherent form. This foundation is further developed in a later temple such as the 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶𝗁𝗂 temple. Here, sculptural treatment becomes more refined. Figures shows greater fluidity in posture, better anatomical portion, and more confident spatial arrangement. Surface detailing also increases, especially in drapery, jewelry, and decorative elements. Iconographically, representation become more structured and systematic, reflecting a clearer organization of sculptural programs. If we look at this entire sequence from Halasi to Badami, Badami to Aihole, Aihole to Pattadakal, and then later temples, a clear pattern emerges. This is not a sudden transformation, it is gradual progression. Progression from simplicity to experimentation, experimentation to refinement. During this phase, the treatment of both human divine figures become more balanced and expressive. There is a visible sense of movement and rhythm moving away from earlier rigidity. At the same time, ornamentation becomes increasingly complex. Elements such as jewelry, drapery, carved pilasters, and continuous friezes creates richly articulated surfaces. These developments reflect not only artistic skills but also sustained patronage and resources availability. Refinement beyond ornamentation. Let me now move to a slightly different kind of refinement. At the Chandramauleshwara temple, Hubli, refinement is not expressed through heavy ornamentation but through architecture and spatial design. This temple follows a Sarvatobhadra plan with entrance on all four cardinal directions. The shrine is open from every side, creating a sense of accessibility and inclusivity. At the center is a Chaturmukha Shivalingam with each face oriented towards one entrance. This arrangement creates a direct relationship between space, movement, and worship. The devotees does not approach the deity from a single fixed direction. The experience becomes multidirectional. So here the focus shift from surface decoration to spatial meaning. The relative simplicity of exterior balanced by the conceptual depth of the plan, this reflects a mature stage of development where refinement lies in design and symbolism, not just in ornamentation. If we move further, a different kind of refinement appears at 𝗏𝗏𝗴𝗶𝗁𝗂 temple. Although located in present-day Maharashtra, this temple shows strong stylistic connection with northwestern Karnataka. This immediately tells us something important. Artistic traditions do not remain confined within fixed boundaries. They move, they interact. At 𝗏𝗏𝗴𝗶𝗁𝗂 temple, ornamentation reaches its high level of complexity. Swargamandapa, with its open circular design and central roof opening, creates a powerful architectural space. Around it, we see intricately carved pillars, detailed narrative panels, and richly articulated surfaces. Here, ornamentation is not minimal, it is extensive, controlled, and highly refined. Sculpture enhances both the structure and visual experience. Iconographically, the presence of Harihara elements with the sanctum reflects an important idea of synthesis. Shaiva and Vaishnava traditions are not separated, they are integrated. This shows that artistic development is not only visual but also cultural and ideological. So, if Chandramoleshwara represents refinement through space and symbolism, Kopeshwara represents refinement through ornamentation and synthesis. Together, they show the diversity within regional traditions. Now we go for analytical understanding. If we now step back and look at all the sites together from 𝗦𝗱𝗶𝗶 caves and Pattadakal to Halasi, Trikuteshwara and Chandramoleshwara and Kopeshwara temple, a clear pattern emerges. This is a process of both continuity and variations. In terms of form, we move from simple to rigid compositions to more refined and dynamic figures. In iconography, representation become more elaborate and organized, yet continue allow regional variation. And in ornamentation, we see a shift from minimal treatment to highly intricate surface articulation. At the same time, these developments are not isolated. Artistic ideas moved across regions through patronage, artisan mobility, and shared cultural practices. To conclude, temple sculpture in northwestern Karnataka does not represent a fixed or uniform tradition. It represents a process of evolution shaped by region, interaction, and continuity. The form, the earlier foundation at Halasi under the Kadamba dynasty to the experimental phase at Badami caves, Aihole and Pattadakal to the refinement seen in later temples. What we witness is not repetition but transformation. These sculptures are not bound to a single style, they reflect the emergence of distinct regional schools, each with its own identity, yet connected to a larger artistic tradition. And at the same time, sites such as the Kopeshwara temple reminds us that these traditions were never isolated. They moved, they interacted, they adapted. So this is not just a story of continuity. This is story of continuity and change. And this leads to one important understanding. To study temple sculpture in the Deccan, we cannot look at only at the larger narratives. We must look closer at religion and regions, at variations, at connections, because it is within the regional expressions that the true richness of the tradition emerges. These sculptures are not static remains of the past. They are part of an ongoing dialogue, a dialogue between regions and a dialogue between traditions and the dialogue between ideas. And that dialogue continues always. Thank you.
Thank you. Next presenter on terrific forms and regional expressions, an iconographical study of Bhairava sculptures in the Hoysala School of Art by Sanjay Sankar. I welcome Sanjay Sankar to make his presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I thank the organizers and the session chair for allowing me to present my paper, Facets of the Hoysala Monuments. The Hoysala temples are predominantly constructed employing chloride schist or talc schist. These materials, being relatively soft in composition, enabled the sculptors to achieve an exceptional degree of precision and intricacy in carving. The interdependence of architecture and sculptural art within Hoysala temples is particularly significant, facilitating the realization of one of their most distinctive features, namely the incorporation of extensive sculptural panels along the exterior walls of the structure. These sculptural programs fulfilled a dual function. They not only enhanced the decorative richness of the temple, but also enabled architects to reinforce the stellate or rectilinear plan of the building by aligning the projection of the sculptural blocks within the contours of the superstructure. As noted by Shweta, The Hoysala school of art does not conform to the conventional evolutionary trajectory of inception, development, culmination, and decline. Rather, it appears already in a mature and fully developed state when the Hoysalas commence their architectural activities. To better understand this phenomenon, the sculptural representations of a single deity, namely Bhairava, as depicted in temples that constitute key examples of this tradition, will be systematically analyzed. Previous works examining this school of art, including those by Setar, Padmanabha, and Huntington, will be employed to facilitate a detailed study of the icons. The Chennakesava temple complex, Belur. The Vaishnava Chennakesava complex constitutes the earliest large-scale articulation of royal authority, as Vishnuvardhana commemorated his military victories in 1117 CE by constructing 5 temples, among which the Chennakesava temple is preeminent. Although the site predominantly enshrined Vaishnava deities within its principal sanctums, it nevertheless incorporated representations of both Shaiva and Shakta divinities on its exterior walls, a phenomenon prominently visible in the religious edifices situated in the capital centers of the Hoysalas. The Bhairava image depicted on the exterior walls of the Chennakesava temple is depicted in a Tribhanga posture and is endowed with 4 arms or Chaturbhuja. The upper left hand holds the tassel of the Damaru, while the upper right hand holds the shaft of a Trishula, the prongs of which resemble an open flame. The lower left hand clutches a bowl along with the hair of a severed head, combiningly called a Runda Patra, whereas the lower right hand wields a broad-bladed sword or Bindi Phala. These attributes are held with noticeable ease, as evidenced by the delicate modeling of the fingers, which appear to grasp the implements effortlessly. His hair is unbound, with locks cascading in coils over the shoulders, and he is adorned with a forehead ornament or Mastaka Bhushana, embellished with skull motifs, further intensifying the terrific aspects of the deity. The facial expression is depicted accentuating this feeling of terror, with wide open eyes and pronounced fangs emerging from his thick lips. Though the figure appears nude and devoid of drapery, the ornamentation is executed with considerable intricacy, comprising earrings in the form of sarpakundalas, a necklet or khanti, necklaces or haras of varying sizes, shoulder ornaments or bhujashobhanas, and bangles or kankanas. A stomach band or udarabandha, a girdle or katibhushana with 2 tassels extending over the thighs, anklets or nupuras with a beaded design, and sandals as footwear are also noticed. Interestingly, the haras are further accentuated by a serpent interwoven among them, evoking a liminal aesthetic despite the profusion of adornments. The upper segment of the Yajñopaveeta is concealed beneath the haras, causing its lower portion to emerge abruptly near the Udarabandha, while the Katibhushana is richly embellished with pendant bells. Notably, the deity is also adorned with a large garland or Vaijayantika, which begins as a chain-like motif but transitions into a skull garland or Mundamala at its center. A serpent is further depicted encircling the deity at the level of the knees, and below that, multiple emaciated figures flank him on either side. These attendant figures represent the Vetalas or hungry ghouls believed to subsist upon corpses within cremation grounds. These figures are rendered in varied postures, with the figure on the left identifiable as female, accompanied by a dog, which is the vehicle or vahana of the deity, climbing upon her in an attempt to lick the severed head. Hoysaleshwara Temple, Halibid. The dynastic Shaiva monument, that is the dual-shined Hoysaleshwara temple, was likely constructed between 1120 and 1160 CE, and its twin Linga sanctuaries were dedicated to Vishnuvardhana as Hoysaleshwara or Lord of the Hoysalas, and to his queen Shantala Devi under the appellation Shantaleshwara. An image of Bhairava from the walls of the Hoysaleshwara shrine depicts him as 10-armed or Dasabhuja, although several arms are damaged, obscuring the full range of attributes originally held. The sculpture is characterized by a high degree of detail, with only select parts of the body visible, while others are entirely obscured by dense ornamentation. The deity is framed by a stele surmounted by a 𝗲𝗓𝗏, and an ornate umbrella-like element crowns the figure. The Jata Makuta is noteworthy, featuring a Kalasa-like form at the top and a substantial Mastaka Bhushana at its base. In the middle portion, however, his hair is bound in a top knot by a serpent, yet the voluminous curls spill outward, forming a halo around the head. On the left hand, his dexterous fingers grasps a 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶, which has a serpent coiling around the skull, a circular shield or 𝗥𝗲𝗏, and a 𝗠𝗏𝗴𝗃. On the right hand, one can identify the upper portion of a spear or sula, a broken trishula, a manuscript or pustaka, a serpent or sarpa, and a bindifala. The deity bears a hara descending across the chest, which incorporates beads fashioned in skull-like forms. He is also adorned with two katibhushanas, one with a jeweled design and another broader gem-studded band furnished with multiple bells. The dog standing on its hind legs is uniquely shown wearing a collar, and the attendant figures are equally distinctive, including a female Vetala with an elaborate coiffure on the left and royal musicians on the right, suggesting the deity's presence across both liminal and worldly spheres. KoRRavai Temple, Halibut. The royally sponsored KoRRavai Temple, constructed in 1219 CE, is a triple shrine structure whose sculpture closely parallels those of the Hoysala Temple. A distinctive six-armed or Shatbhuja representation of Bhairava is observed on the walls of this temple, depicted in a dynamic dancing posture. Although partially damaged on the left side, the sculpture remains sufficiently preserved to permit a detailed analysis. A floral and creeper arrangement surmounts the figure, who is notably devoid of the canine Vahana below. The deity is nude yet profusely ornamented, consistent with earlier examples. He wears an elaborately decorated makuta accompanied by an ornate halo, and the jewelry is rendered in motion, corresponding with the deity's dance, seemingly in rhythm with the instruments played by the Vetalas, depicted below. The left hands firmly grasp from top to bottom a damaru held aloft and nearly merging with the floral design, an embellished 𝗥𝗏𝗏, and a damaged lower hand that likely held a 𝗠𝗏𝗴𝗃. On the right hand, the deity holds with ease a long shafted trishula, along with an arrow and a bindifala, the latter shown piercing a warrior or demonic figure wielding a sword. The downward orientation of the trishula also resembles a samhara aspect of the deity, a feature not encountered in the previously examined examples. To interpret the significance of this aspect, it is necessary to examine the epigraphic corpus of the Hoysalas to ascertain the perceptions of the deity held at the time. Before moving on, it may be noted that Bhairava's raised right foot bears a floral motif at its center, suggesting that even in an act of destruction, the deity remains an embodiment of the divine. Bhairava in the inscriptions of the Hoysalas. During the reign of the Hoysalas, numerous inscriptions were issued containing eulogies or prashasti for the rulers and subordinate elites under whose authority various donations were made. Within these records, it is evident that among the epithets employed to glorify such figures, they are frequently compared to the deity Bhairava in terms of martial prowess and their destructive capability. It is further observed that Vishnuvardhana in particular bore several epithets that explicitly compare him to Bhairava. Thus, in an inscription from the Brahmeshwara temple in Chikkamangaluru, he is styled as a Chola Kula Pralaya Bhairava, or Bhairava of the final deluge of the Chola lineage. And in another inscription from Chaundeshwari temple in the Hasan district, he is designated as Pandian Drupa Kula Pralaya Kala Bhairava, or Kala Bhairava, or the final deluge of the Pandya royal line. Hence, the temples commissioned by the Hoysala rulers or erected in their honor likely incorporated a visual association between Bhairava and battlefield victory in the sculptural representations of the deity. This proposition may be further substantiated by analyzing a select example.
Mr. Sanjay,
Yes, sir.
you have 2 minutes more.
Okay, sir.
Yeah,
I am going to finish.
yeah.
Bhairava and war imagery. An eight-armed Ashtabhuja image of Bhairava is encountered in the subshrine on the left, adjacent to the first tier of steps leading to the Chennakesava temple. Here, the deity is sculpted with considerable care, such that even in the absence of his characteristic fangs, the three bulging eyes impart a distinctively ferocious expression. His rope-like curly hair is seen spreading across the shoulders, and he is adorned with the customary accoutrements, noticeably with the dog Vahana being absent. In his left hands, the deity holds a trishula with an elongated shaft, a multi-headed sarpa, a pustaka, and a rundapatra, within which the severed head is noticeably depicted with well-defined facial hair. In the right hand, he grasped the tassel of a damaru, a disc-like object, a downward pointing curved sword, and the hilt of a now broken bindifala. It is the lower half of the sculpture that emerges as the most distinctive among all the examples analyzed in the present study. Flanked by the customary Vetalas engaged in musical performance, the deity is shown standing on a prone decapitated corpse. The left hand of this figure appears severed and placed near the neck, with the intestines protruding outside the composition. Beneath the feet of his body are two additional severed heads, raising the possibility that the missing head of the corpse may correspond either to one of these or to the head held by Bhairava, given its unusual facial detailing. The scene beneath the deity may be interpreted more convincingly as a battlefield setting rather than one of self-sacrifice, as it would be implausible for a single individual to simultaneously enact severance of the hand, extraction of the intestines, and decapitation, each of which would independently result in death. It may thus be inferred that the figure upon whom Bhairava stands represents an adversary encountered on the battlefield, who has been violently dismembered as a consequence of the deity's wrath. Observations and conclusion. Most images of Bhairava within the Hoysala school of art exhibit a noticeably masculine and anatomically robust form, with his frequent depiction in Tribhanga imparting a sense of dynamism throughout the figure. Although the deity is in certain instances represented without overtly ferocious facial features, his association with serpents and severed heads, employed both as ornaments and weapons, along with the presence of Vetalas, effectively convey the Hoysala artist's intention to depict the deity as operating across both terrifying and divine realms. Some representations present the deity in a posture suggestive of movement, complete with sandals, while other, particularly those in the Samhara aspect, are rendered without footwear. Thus, the sculptors appear to have portrayed the deity in close accordance with his Puranic characterization as a naked wanderer of cremation grounds, while simultaneously representing him in certain icons as a figure closely associated with martial valor and imagery of warfare. Ultimately, when Hoysala period sculptures are analyzed within their cultural context, identified in this instance through Puranic and inscriptional accounts, it may be discerned that within their artistic program, every icon contributed to an understanding of the collective religious and cultural traditions of the period in which it was produced. Further analysis should therefore avoid fragmenting the visual experience and instead approach the art as a coherent whole, both architecturally and socially. I thank everyone for their time. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sanjay, for the beautiful presentations on these Bhairava sculptures. The next presentation, heroes, heads, and goddesses, an analysis of self-sacrifice before KoRRavai Durga in the Pallava School of Art by Sriranjani, Sriramajayam. Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. The presentation topic today is Heroes, Heads, and Goddesses, an analysis of self-sacrifice before KoRRavai Durga in the Pallava School of Art. So in this presentation, we will be looking about the summary of my research, background, Pallava School of Art, forms and motivations of self-sacrifice in Tamil society, textual source about self-sacrifice to KoRRavai, analysis of self-sacrifice in the KoRRavai Durga panels of Thondai Mandalam, findings and observation, and references. The act of self-mutilation and self-decapitation before 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶, the ancient Tamil war goddess, occupies a distinctive place in the devotional and martial ideology of early Tamilagam. References scattered across the Sangam attest to this practice as an expression of heroic honor, battlefield woe, and proprietary offering. The sculptural panels from the Pallava period depicting goddess Durga multi-armed and standing atop the buffalo demon were incorporated by the sculptors of their time not as a foreign deity but as the goddess 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 in Durga's form. While the goddess retains her essential character as a fierce and triumphant deity against evil, the Pallava period representations of her imagery reveal a nuanced evolution in relation to the sacrificing figure flanking her. Initial observations of the panels depict two devotees at the goddess's feet, one actively performing self-mutilation, that is Navagandam in Tamil, and the other in adoration or performing self-decapitation, Arigandam in Tamil. Therefore, representing two phases of the devotional continuum, the devotee in adoration about to take the vow, and the other actively performing self-sacrifice. This paper argues that the Pallava rendering of the self-sacrificing tradition to 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 constitutes a regionally specific iconographic program reflecting the intersection of indigenous Tamil goddesses' theology with the evolving sculptural conventions of Pallava artistic idioms. Drawing on evidence from rock-cut sculptures and freestanding stone icons distributed across the ancient division of Tondai Mandalam, the study traces how 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶's identity as a goddess of war was adapted and regionally reflected within the Pallava sculptural framework. Etymologically, in Tamil, the term 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 has been interpreted in multiple ways. One explanation derives it from kol plus 𝗤𝗏, kol meaning to kill, 𝗤𝗏 connoting the eldest. In this sense, 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 may be understood as a primordial female deity associated with the destruction of enemies. Another interpretation reads the term as 𝗥𝗲𝗻, victory or success, combined with 𝗤𝗏, elder woman, suggesting that 𝗥𝗲𝗴 was venerated as the supreme female deity invoked for victory in warfare. With the emergence of sculptural traditions during the Pallava period, 𝗥𝗲𝗴 was increasingly represented in iconographic forms that incorporated features of Puranic Durga as described in the Devi Mahatmyam. This process ultimately led to her assimilation into Brahminical pantheon as Mahishasuramurthy. Pallava School of Art. The Pallava dynasty emerged as prominent independent rulers in the early medieval South India. Initially serving as feudatories under the Satavahana dynasty, they later evolved into a powerful dynasty. The Pallava established their capital at Kanchipuram and maintained a major port at Mamallapuram, which attracted trade and facilitated the accumulation of resources. The Pallava school of art flourished between 6th and 9th century CE, representing a formative period in South Indian stone architecture and iconography. They were among the earliest South Indian rulers to experiment extensively with hard stone for carving Puranic and mythological themes into living rock. Their monuments incorporated both Shaiva and Vaishnava iconography, reflecting the religious plurality of the period. The group of monuments at Mamallapuram continues to hold recognition as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, attesting to the enduring significance of Pallava artistic achievements. Forms and motivations of self-sacrifice in Tamil culture. The Tamil society has long been familiar with acts of self-sacrifice, including self-immolation, self-decapitation, that is Arigandam, and self-mutilation, Navagandam, from as early as the early historic period. The motivation behind these acts of self-sacrifice were varied and deeply embedded in socio-cultural, political, and religious frameworks. Individuals undertook self-sacrifice for a variety of reasons, as mentioned in the right. In certain instances, such acts received social recognition and were commemorated through the granting of land to the family of the individual. These acts also drew the attention of foreign travelers. accounts by Marco Polo and Odoric of Pordenone in 𝗥𝗲𝗴 and the 𝗦𝗰𝗂𝗃 provide valuable external observations on the continuation of such traditions in South India. Arigandam denotes the act of self-decapitation, wherein an individual severs his head using a sword or dagger, typically from behind the neck. Where Navagandam denotes a form of ritual self-mutilation, in which the devotee inflicts cut on 9 parts of the body or vital veins. Although the act is sometimes understood to culminate in self-decapitation, leading to the assumption that Arigandam forms a part of Navagandam, it is very important to emphasize that the two are distinct practices. Also, 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗏 is primarily associated with blood sacrifice rather than exclusively with self-sacrifice. Thus, figures holding dagger may also represent blood offerings, not necessarily self-decapitation, which can be seen in the picture on the right. Constant warfare with the Chalukyas, alongside famine and disease, created social uncertainty, reinforcing the perceived need for sacrificial acts. This context directly shaped sculptural representation of self-sacrifice to 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗏, transforming theological ideas into visual stone narratives. Textual sources of self-sacrifice to 𝗥𝗲𝗴. The mention about self-sacrifice to 𝗥𝗲𝗴 are evident in Sangam corpus, such as Purananuru, Agananuru, 𝗫𝗫, later elaborated in the Tamil epic Silappadigaram, and further developed in medieval texts such as 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗏 and 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗏. Sangam literature lays the ideological foundation for blood offering, while Silappadigaram gives it clearer ritual articulation. The later Bharani text, in turn, magnifies these elements into highly dramatic, almost theoretical portrayals of self-sacrifice. Analysis of self-sacrifice in the 𝗥𝗲𝗴 Durga panels from Thondai Mandalam. The region of Thondai Mandalam, comprising present-day districts such as Viluppuram, Thiruvallur, Chengalpattu, Kanchipuram, Tiruvannamalai, Kallakurichi, and Kadalur, preserves a significant number of 𝗥𝗲𝗴 representations from the Pallava period. Many scholars have noted that some of the earliest known 𝗥𝗲𝗴 sculptures are located at Mamalappuram. However, evidence from the Niranjishwara temple located at Thiruvallur district suggests that the worship of 𝗥𝗲𝗴 may predate Pallava artistic patronage in this region. The presence of this possibly early sculpture therefore indicates that local communities were already venerating the deity through sculptural forms even before they were sculpted in Pallava monuments. This points to an existing indigenous tradition that was later formalized and expanded under the royal influence. More broadly, sculptural representations of self-sacrifice associated with 𝗥𝗲𝗴 begin to appear from the 7th century CE onwards across the South Indian region. Mamalappuram, present-day Mahabalipuram, preserves some of the earliest sculptural representation of 𝗥𝗲𝗴 in association with ritual self-sacrifice. In Draupadi Ratha and Varaha Mandapa, 𝗥𝗲𝗴 appears in a relatively early iconographic form, four-armed, holding conch and discus, and standing on a pedestal, indicating a stage prior to full assimilation into Durga iconography. Both the panels prominently depict the act of Arigandam, a devotee preparing for self-decapitation by grasping the tuft of hair and wielding a sword, while another on the right in reverential worship or adoration. The compositions foreground the embodied act of offering, making the deity central to the visual narrative. A more elaborate articulation is seen in the Adivaraha cave temple, where 𝗥𝗲𝗴 stands in Tribanga atop a buffalo head with a parasol, accompanied by female attendants, ganas, and vahanas. Her attributes reflect a more developed stage in her assimilation with Brahminical goddess traditions. At her feet, devotees perform Navagandam alongside act of worship, expanding the sacrificial theme. The lower rock cut located at Tiruchirappalli, also known as Pandya Cave, preserves an unfinished four-armed 𝗥𝗲𝗴 flanked by devotees, displays iconographic variation. The left devotee appears in an unfinished posture of adoration, while the right is shown performing Arigandam, holding the tuft of hair in preparation for self-decapitation. A similar arrangement appears in the panel at Jinji, There, the left devotee is in adoration and the right devotee is engaged in Arigandam, as seen in the pictures. Notably, the coiffures of the devotees closely resemble those observed in the Pandya cave panels, suggesting stylistic continuity across the sites. A distinct 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 panel identified at Kanchipuram introduces several distinctive variations. The right devotee here is shown in the act of drawing a dagger in preparation of self-sacrifice. More significantly, the left devotee is a female figure, a rare feature that suggests broader social participation in the cult of 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 and raises the possibility that this sculpture was commissioned by local communities rather than royal authorities. Further examples from Kadalur and the Tiruchirappalli region, dated to around 8th century CE, return to the standard arrangement, the left devotee in adoration and the right devotee performing Arigandam. However, variations are evident in the coiffures of the devotees, which appear to evolve from the 8th century CE onwards, indicating regional and chronicle developments. A 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 panel discovered at Periyanesalur, Viluppuram district carries special significance due to its accompanying inscription. In this panel, the standard arrangement is followed. The inscription reveals that sculpture was commissioned by the chieftain Malayaman, a subordinate under the Pallava dynasty. This provides crucial evidence confirming that the iconography of self-sacrifice to 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 was not limited to royal patronage but was also supported by local chieftains. Keelkolattur panel is notable for its monolithic execution and also the pedestal rather than the buffalo head. At Nathamedu, Viluppuram district, the usual arrangement of devotees is reversed with the Arigandam figure on the left and the adoration figure on the right. Towards the end of the Pallava period, 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 panels begin to exhibit subtle shift in bodily movements, posture, and the stylization of attributes, reflecting variations conditioned by the spatial context in which these sculptures were installed. This continuity can be identified in 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 panels from Kallakurichi, Olagappuram, and the Pulamangai temple belonging to Chola period. Findings and observations. The sculptural corpus reveals a strong concentration of 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 panels depicting self-sacrifice in Viluppuram district. While the primary focus remains on the sacrificial figures, 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 herself also displays notable consistency with minor variations. The evidence examined in this study demonstrates that the association between 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 and ritual self-sacrifice formed a significant and enduring component of early medieval South Indian religious practice, particularly during the Pallava period. The recurrence of these motifs in both royally sponsored and locally commissioned sculptures suggests that such practices were embedded across multiple social strata. While 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 panels depicting self-sacrifice are relatively uncommon, a considerable number of 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 panels and hero stones can nevertheless be identified from the Pallava period, underscoring the continued significance of this cult and its association with memorial and sacrificial traditions. This study, therefore, establishes that 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 panels depicting self-sacrifice are not isolated anomalies, but constitute important historical evidence for understanding the intersections of devotion, heroism, ritual violence, and memorialization in early South Indian society. So these are the books and research articles referred. Thank you.
Thank you, Sriranjani, for your detailed analysis of KoRRavai Durga sculptures in the Pallava School of Art. Now, may I request Dr. Pallabi Bagchi would be speaking on prescribing the goddess, textual iconography and sculptural practice of Tara in Pala art. So, may I request Dr. Pallabi to make her presentation.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon to the organizers at Bleach. I'll just share my presentation. Okay, so my topic today is on prescribing the goddess, and what I'm basically looking at is how the textual iconography, which are there in the prescriptive text in the Pala period, particularly Sadhanamala and Nispanna Yogavali, are actually describing how Tara is supposed to look like in her iconography, and whether this art and the sculptures that we are finding in the Pala period of Tara reflect that equally. So it's kind of basically looking at the relation between text and image and seeing if they have standardized format or are there variations which come in. So what does it mean to prescribe a goddess? So in the Pala period, we are finding texts which are like Sadhanamala, Nishpanna Yogavali and others, including the Shastrika Pragyaparamita, which have a lot of descriptions about how the mandala system works, where we have a description of how the gods and goddesses are arranged in a hierarchical order, and also descriptions about how these gods and goddesses look like. Now, the question is whether these texts are actually dictating the sculptural forms of how these gods, and for us and this particular paper, how the goddess Tara looks like, or whether there were artistic reinterpretations or interpretations available which end up dictating the text formation. So it's kind of trying to find out which came first, the text or the sculptures. In case of the choice of Tara, she's one of the most popular female goddesses in Buddhism, and she becomes particularly important during the Pala period. So I restricted my study to understand this relationship between text and image based on Tara. Now, there are previous works which have worked into the iconography of Buddhism and Buddhist deities, and on Taras particularly. I am referring to most of the important and seminal works which are there, including works by Bhinatash Bhattacharya, Kumaraswamy, Miranda Shaw, and of course, we have works by R.S. Gupte and others. But what these works do is they tend to only look at the prescriptive text in trying to find the iconographical markers of how to identify these deities, and then look at the identified deities in general. Um, Text like Buddhist goddesses in India, the Dictionary of Buddhist Iconography, and Iconography of Hindu, Buddhists, and Jains have a lot of information about the sadhanas and the descriptions which are there in the text, but they do not correlate them with the sculptures. And that creates a lacuna which this current study is trying to kind of address, whether all the descriptions which we find in the text translate into the sculptural practice of the period. Now, the two texts which have been considered are Sadhanamala and Nispanna Yogavali. Both were composed during the Pala period between 8th to 12th century, and in fact are the two seminal works of Buddhist iconography which are available. The methodology which has been taken is a comparative analysis of the text and the sculptures. And what we are doing is not just assuming that there is a correspondence between both. So we're looking at whether the art which was available prior to 8th century leads to the composition of these texts, or whether the composition of this text reflects in the art which comes thereafter. What I'm also looking at are whether the specific iconographic prescriptions, such as postures, attribution, gestures, ornamentation, are also in the realization of the sculptures or in the practical visibility of the sculptures, and again trying to look further into the relationship between both. Now, starting with a little bit detail about Tara and the Pala period. Tara becomes particularly important during this time because she is in fact part of the national emblem, not national, regional or the royal emblem of the Pala Empire. And what is happening is the texts like Sadhanamala are actually continuing to highlight her importance within the Buddhist framework. So Sadhanamala, which reads as garland of means for attainment, it's a group of sadhanas which are there. So prayers and mantras which are also describing the goddess. Of course, there are other deities involved in the text as well, but she features as one of the main important female deities. And Nispanna Yogavali, which is a later text, a little later than Sadhanamala, written by 𝗦𝗵𝗂𝗃𝗃 Gupta, which is again a similar text, which is prescriptive text in nature, has a lot of descriptions about the mandala construction, the kind of hierarchical setup of the gods and goddesses in relation to Lord Buddha. And then finally, we also have the descriptions of these deities while they are engaged in ritual or prayer. These texts, when they're talking about Tara, they highlight about how she is first the bodhisattva. She is a goddess of compassion, and she is mainly known for her role as a savior. She's mainly known for her role as a savior because she's compassionate and provides protection to anyone and everyone who reaches or who prays to her. The text also highlight that there are multiple forms of Tara, like green and white being the most important, and then there are others like yellow, red, and black and blue. And the texts situated in the Pala period also highlight the transition or the coexistence of Mahayana and Vajrayana practices. And under the Palas, we do find a lot of development of the Vajrayana or the Tantric Buddhist practices. So Tara emerges in that kind of situation where she is a Mahayana deity, but in the course of the Pala period, we are also seeing her becoming one of the prominent deities in Tantric or Vajrayana Buddhism. Now, this is the time Pala becomes, or like Tara becomes more important under the Palas, and we find this in the inscription, one of the inscriptions of Govinda III, who is a Rashtrakuta king. Now, in the Rashtrakuta copper plate, we find the mention that when Govinda is going to attack Dharmapala, who is one of the important kings of the Pala empire, he mentions that Dharmapala's flag has the image of goddess Tara. Now, from this, we are starting the discussion and understanding that Tara must have been an important deity under the Palas, and hence, under the Pala, whatever text is being composed will have paid equal attention to the development of the image of Tara. Now, if you see these two images, one is a bronze image on the left and the right one is a stone basalt image. They are of different postures and forms of Tara. They are green Tara, but in one she is seated without any attendant figures, and the other she has more ornamentation. She has the five Dhyani Buddhas on the stele behind her. She has her attendants and she's in a standing posture. So you see that even though she's a more popular sanitized figure under the Pala period, there are variations in which she is being portrayed. Now, the question which the paper is asking is whether these variations are accounted for in the text or whether they are coming out of regional variations in the worship and practice of the goddess. The texts are describing her in a very formal manner. So she's described as Shyamatara, Prasannatara, and other forms. So different names, mainly Shyamatara or the green Tara becomes important. She is highlighted as someone who has a singular face, two arms, sometimes four, always seated in a Lalita Sun. Not all the descriptions, actually, not a lot of the descriptions describe her in a standing form. She's mostly seated, with her right arm in the Varada Mudra, or the bone giving mudra, and the left arm holding the blue lotus, or the Utpala. She's seated on a lotus pedestal, and her feet, when the Lalatasana, is also placed on a lotus. So this is the more generic descriptions that we find over the text. And beyond this, the descriptions vary depending on the skin color. Depending on which variation of Tara she is, and the jewelry. So there isn't actually much difference in the iconography of her seated position, which is Lalitasana, the mudras which are there, which is Varada Mudra, and her association with the blue lotus, which she holds in her left hand. Now, if that is the description, and that is the identifying marker of how Tara is to be recognized, we find that the identifying markers of lotus, hand gestures, and the seated position do match more or less. Not all the sculptures have her in a seated position, but they do match with the other points of her standing on a lotus pedestal or seated on a lotus pedestal, the lotus being present, and the Varada Mudra being present. But as you see in the image which is present here from Nalanda, there is still a difference in the other kind of additions or variations which are coming in. The kind of selection, adaptation, and then, of course, the kind of mediation process of creating these variations by the artist or perhaps the patron becomes an important part in then forming the image of Tara. If we look at these images, what I've done is I've divided the images between its materials. So I've looked at a few bronze images and then I've looked at a few stone images. In the bronze images, we are finding that this is the closest form in its correspondence with the textual prescriptions. Most of the images that we are finding are of seated Tara. Some are also standing, but mostly seated. She has a throne behind her. She sits on a lotus pedestal sometimes, or otherwise she's always seated on a higher raised pedestal. The lotus is present. Her right arm is in Varada Mudra. She has the basic ornamentation which is described in the text. She does not have any attendants, and most of the time you will find that there is some inscription or the other, but that is not part of the text. That is part of the tradition of merit making or Deya Dharma, which is part of Buddhism. Now, in these images that we are finding, the first image is from Nalanda again. The second image is from um, Hooghly region in West Bengal, and the third image is found from Nalanda again. So Nalanda, the regions of Bengal, and then areas like Urkihar, Gaya are the core centers of Pala period Buddhism. So it would make sense that these images are then following the text, because that is also the place where these texts would have been composed. Now, if I look at these stone images, and this is from Rajshahi in Bangladesh, there is a lot more elaborate composition which is coming in. So we're looking at more attendant figures being joined, at least two of them. We have Ekajata and Marichi, and there are two other popular female goddesses in Buddhism, but who are often seen as attendants of goddess Tara. We also find more ornate stela between, like behind her, and we find her ornamentation quite elaborate. The variation in the lotus is also present. Sometimes we have a closed 𝗏𝗏𝗏, sometimes we have an open 𝗏𝗏𝗏, which distinguishes between a blue Tara and a green Tara. We also have differentiation in the way her mukut or the crown looks like, the facial expressions, the presence of a small votive stupa in her narrative formation, or whether we have other figures like small. So if you look at the bottom, if you have small donors present there or not. Sometimes you will also find the image of Buddha, Avalokiteshwar, or other figures present in the stone, or rather flanking Tara. The other images which are found, the variations mostly show her in a seated or a standing posture. In stone, we find more standing postured Tara, and some also have a position inside a water stupa, and this creates an image where we can see that she's one of the central figures in Buddhism. Now, in these figures, we also find there are inscriptions present, yes, but more often than not, there are differences in hairstyle, there are differences in her jewelry. The ornamentation sometimes is less dense, but you do find the carving which suggests what kind of garment she would have been wearing, and the garment would also have further details as to the texture or motifs inside it. So if you look at the image on the left, she is wearing a lower garment which would have design on it. Now, what are we looking at then? So we are basically seeing that there's a consistency when we are talking about the basic iconography. We are talking about how her seated position, the lotus symbolism, and of course the Varada Mudra stays constant. And beyond that, we find there are variations coming in, especially with attributes such as attendants who are present or not, stylistic regional features, and of course we're looking at the presence of local workshops and patronization. So depending on what the patrons would have preferred her, be it a standing or seated position, the sculptor's role in what kind of form of Tara they would have wanted to create, and the difference between local workshops of both stone and bronze images would create the differences which are staying. And because of these factors, we are getting what is known as the text image tension, which suggests that um, there has to be a relation between the iconography and style. The differentiation which is being made between iconography and style is the basic one, where iconography is a prescriptive description, while style is dependent on the medium and the workshop, which is practicing which is practicing the production of these images. And the relation between these are a two-way process. It cannot be that the text is determining the formation of image or the image is determining the formation of text. They're both taking place simultaneously, which is informing each other. So basically, the conclusion which or the main point which we're leading to is there's a negotiation between the text, the artist, and the context, which is making Tara into a fluid, adaptable icon, which is very unique to her. And we do not see this in case of Buddha and the other bodhisattvas, which is the most strict. And the reason for Tara becoming more fluid is probably because of her role as being one of the more compassionate goddesses who can appear in any form depending on the needs of the devotees. And this is why it creates an interesting process where the prescription is not actually strictly controlling her iconography. It's the artist and the patrons who are creating a process of interpretation, which is shaped by multiple factors like material, workshop, regional variation, and the demands of the patron. So basically, through this work, what I've been trying to look at is the dynamic interplay between canonical authorities, the prescriptive text, and the artistic agency of the local regional variations and workshops which are present. And of course, the role of patrons who create a kind of synergy, and it creates how these kind of different variations in sculptural practices can be made. Now, these variations are not deviations, they are actually part of our iconography and helps us understand the regional kind of practical way in which the gods and goddesses, in our case Tara, would have been actually interacted with the society at that time. So these are the few references I looked at. I mainly looked at the translations by Vinayatosh Bhattacharya for Sadhanamala and Nishpanna Yogavalli. And then I looked at the other works for understanding their roles as well as Tara's role. And thank you.
So thank you, Pallavi, for your insightful presentations on the text as well as iconography of Tara in Pala art. So now may I request the next speaker, Tori Chaudhary.
So the title of my paper is The Sculptural Heritage of Kamakhya Temple and the Regional Identity of Assamese Sacred Art. The Kamakhya Temple is located on Nilachal Hill in Assam and is one of the most significant centers of Shakta worship in India. It is associated with the myth of Sati Yoni, establishing it as an important Shakti Peeth and a major center of tantric practices. However, beyond its religious importance, the temple is equally significant as a site of artistic production, particularly in terms of its sculptural and architectural features. This paper approaches Kamakhya Temple from an art historical perspective. The aim of this paper is to examine the Kamakhya Temple through its cultural heritage, architectural significance, and iconographic program. It also seeks to understand how these elements contribute to the construction of a distinct regional artistic identity. In doing so, the paper situates Kamakhya Temple within the broader context of regional variation in Indian temple art. First, the historical context. So the origins of the temple can be traced back to the early medieval period. The present structure was reconstructed in the 16th century under the patronage of Koch King Naranarayan. Despite periods of destruction and rebuilding, the temple has continued as an active center of worship, reflecting both continuity and transformation. This layered history contributes significantly to its artistic development. So about the Nilachal architecture, one of the most distinctive features of the Kamakhya temple is its architectural style, known as the Nilachal style. It is characterized by a dome-like superstructure built over a polygonal base, which refers from classical temple typologies such as the Nagara style. This architectural form reflects a localized adaptation, combining multiple influences into a unique regional expression. This becomes important when we analyze it within the framework of regional art tradition. The sculptural program of the temple plays a role in its artistic identity. The temple walls function as a visual and symbolic narrative surface. These sculptural elements can be categorized into religious figures, secular depiction, flora and fauna motifs, and geometrical designs. These categories are not isolated but interact to create a layered visual language that reflects both aesthetic and symbolic meanings. The religious iconography, the religious sculptures primarily depict various forms of the goddess, including Durga and Chamunda, reflecting the Shakta and Tantric tradition associated with the temple. Also, we can see the Mahavidya temples on wider campus. These sculptures are not merely decorative but carry deep ritual and symbolic significance. They form part of a larger iconographic program that expresses theological ideas through visual representation. Flora and fauna, in addition to religious imagery, the temple features a range of flora and fauna motifs. The lotus symbolizes purity and creation, while the lion represents power and is associated with the goddess. Hybrid forms such as 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 further enhance the symbolic richness of the sculptural program. These elements contribute both to the aesthetic composition and to the symbolic meaning of the temple. Then comes the geometrical design. Geometrical designs are also an important component of the temple's visual language. These include bands, friezes, and interlocking patterns integrated into the structure. There is a synthesis of geometric and organic forms, which may also suggest interaction with broader decorative tradition. This further reinforces the idea of artistic synthesizes at Kamakya temple. The stylistic influence, from a stylistic perspective, the temple reflects multiple influence. Elements of Gupta art can be seen in the treatment of sculptural forms, while Orison influence are visible in the decorative detailing and structural articulation. However, these influences are not directly replicated. Instead, they are adapted with a local Assamese context. This results in a unique synthesis rather than imitation. The regional artistic identity, the Kamakya temple can be understood as a significant example of regional artistic identity. It demonstrates how local tradition reinterpret broader Indian artistic forms to create something distinct. The integration of ritual, architecture, and sculptural form transforms the temple into a repository of cultural identity. This highlights its importance within the study of regional variation in Indian art. So to conclude, the Kamakya temple is not only a major religious center, but also an important artistic site. Its sculptural and architectural features reflect a synthesis of multiple influences adapted within a regional context. The temple stands as a powerful example of how regional traditions shape Indian temple art. Therefore, it contributes significantly to our understanding of artistic diversity within the Indian subcontinent. And we can say for recommended future research, we can have comprehensive photogrammetric recording of all exterior sculptures. And thank you so much.
So, thank you, Ms. Tori, for your presentation on the Kamakya temple, a sacred complex in Assam. I thank again all the 5 presenters who have made their presentations in this second session of the National Seminar on Schools of Art in India. I feel this particular session gives us kind of a broad perspective on the regional schools of art. So we had presentations from Southern India, Eastern India, focusing on a variety of temples as well as iconographic features. In general, it has covered temple arts, sculptural arts, iconographical details, as well as the narrative text, canonical text linked to it, the iconographic representations of some specific gods and goddesses. The presentations also have covered some of features of indigenous tradition as well as the Hindu or Buddhist traditions. We had discussions on the text which gives us details about the iconographic attributes and how they are represented in iconographic representations. We had also some discussions on the kingdoms or the time period in which these art forms developed and how it has interacted regionally as well as in pan-Indian context. So these are definitely a very welcome contribution to the knowledge that we have on the Indian art and iconography. I thank all the presenters for their preparation as well as very nice presentations on their specific theme. So now moving ahead, we have specific presentations on Miss Shweta. She has talked on the northwestern Karnataka, in which she has taken examples from several important, very, very important temples like Badami, Aihole, Pattarakal, as well as several other temples, based on which she has come up with her presentations on the regional school of art. And secondly, Mr. Sanjay Sankar, he has talked on the Bhairava iconography specifically in Hoysala School of Art. So there are depictions in the monuments of Billur as well as Halabidu. So these are again very interesting informations with lots of details on the iconography, jewelry, drapery, as well as the features related to the icon or the deity of Bhairava. Then the third presentation was by Sriranjani on the 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶 Durga of the Pallava School of Art, right from the etymology of the deity, as well as then how she emerged as an indigenous goddess, then how transformed into Puranic Durga form, and finally to Mahishasura form. So all these discussions made the presentation very, very interesting. And then Dr. Pallabi Bagchi, she has talked on the text as well as the iconography of the goddess Tara in Pala art, and in which she talks about how the in canonical text how the iconography is described, and how again the sculptors used to take this information and make the attributes as per the norms, as well as sometimes there are also flexibility in the iconographic representation based on the research by Dr. Bagchi. Finally, Miss Tori Chaudhary, she has talked on the sculptural heritage of Kamakhya from the origin, the Naraka legend, and all the sculptures which are on the temple wall, and the categories like religious, secular, flora, fauna, geometric designs, and possible influences on the Kamakhya temple art, as well as the regional artistic identity, which she says as an Assamese regional artistic identity. So these are very, very interesting kind of presentations made by all the speakers, and basically this particular session, or in general this particular seminar, is extremely important for us to have, because it gives us an identity, or if it gives us kind of an understanding of the cultural diversity that we have within the Indian civilization. It also gives us some idea about how we can reconstruct regional history as well as regional art traditions. Then it also gives us some idea related to the regional variations in the art form as well as local identity. So combining the text, practice, iconographic features, art forms as both indigenous as well as well-known traditions, Indian traditions, these discussions help us in furthering our idea, of furthering our knowledge on the Indian sculptural heritage in general. So I thank all the speakers, and some of you have made the presentations very lucid form, as well as with so much of details and precision, and many of you have also given some kind of historiographical note on the topic that you have chosen, and some of you have also given a list of references you have gone. So whoever has not given this historical background, I think it will be very, very good if you can add in your final paper, so that we know who have contributed on this particular theme or the subject prior to your research. And also a good list of bibliography would be helpful for developing your final paper for publication. I thank all of you again for this wonderful session, and the organizers for giving me this opportunity to chair this session and give my comments. Thank you very much.